Helping youth talk about cannabis and reflect on their own choices means considering their perspectives. How and why do the young people in your life use cannabis? The answer might be more complicated than you think.
I use it daily for chronic pain and anxiety and ADHD. Can that not be normalized?
I think for me it really began out of curiosity, but it definitely evolved to a point where I was using weed to cope. Anytime I was sad, I would smoke and it would kind of fog. I see it a little bit like a cloud, and it's kind of like a little comforting blanket.
When we're thinking about the reasons why young people would use cannabis, we're really talking about pretty much as many reasons as there are contexts of use. Social purposes, hanging out with friends, coping purposes. So for coping, we usually talk about in the context of mental health, therapeutic and medical uses. That is mostly talked about in the context of physical health. And then just for fun, there is a lot of therapeutic value in having fun or in being with friends and using for social purposes.
Youth are using cannabis in diverse ways and by diverse ways. There's a lot of cannabis product currently available, and youth can either smoke their cannabis product, vape their cannabis product, or ingest cannabis products named edibles.
People's use and purposes for use can change from one moment of use to another, like it can change throughout their life.
Plenty of young people do use cannabis without problems. That doesn't mean without harms. There's harms associated with cannabis use, but that doesn't define it as problematic substance use. Plenty of young people are using cannabis and not experiencing cannabis use disorder or addiction.
So when does cannabis use become problematic? To help answer that question, think about substance use on a spectrum. On one end, there's no use at all. Experimentation and infrequent use in a safe setting are some examples of non-problematic use. Daily smoking can be harmful to physical and mental health, and for some young people, cannabis use may develop into a problem.
Once it got to the point where I was smoking weed every day just to cope with day-to-day stress, and then I also became a young adult with no coping skills, because my coping skill was smoking weed. That's something that I wish I reflected on and understood more about how you cope with what you have, that makes sense, but recognize that it might not be a long-term solution, and maybe it would be better to actually engage in healthy coping skills.
Bottom line, you need to get down to what's really going on, either mentally or physically. It's not about the use. They're depending on the use to feel better.
Some young people have no interest, and that's great. They also should know about cannabis, but you really need to address young people who are using cannabis so that they know about harm reduction, so they understand the spectrum of cannabis use, so that they can reflect on what their motivations for use are, and just kind of enhance their cannabis literacy so that they can better talk about their experiences and ask questions.
And if you have questions, the Cannabis Knowledge Exchange Hub has current, evidence-based resources about non-medical cannabis for you and the youth in your life. Visit cannabisknowledgehub.ca to get started.